This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. We come to you regular with short business and private equity episodes. We try and both entertain and have people learn a little bit. We want you to come away from this having learned a little something and being entertained a little bit. Today's discussion is the future of work-life balance, ESG, and DEI, and more. So here are a couple perspectives on these very difficult subjects. The first one is work-life balance. And this is a very complicated issue. We hear people in my generation talk constantly about how in that generation people work 50, 60, 70-hour weeks, and now this next generation is more interested in work-life balance. And I find that this is a fascinating perspective, and it's maybe built around, I don't know how you want to put this, F1 households that see the world that way, because we still see people that didn't grow up in F1 households, and some that did, quite frankly. And I'll give you an example. Jesse Pukula, I never pronounced the name right. This Navarro, this athlete, both are billionaires' kids that grew up with these crazy work ethics, has made themselves top 20 tennis players in the world. Pegula just made it to the finals of the U.S. Open. She must have missed the memo on work-life balance. We also see a tremendous amount of other people with just tremendous drive and energy, whether they grew up in affluent families, non-affluent families. Certainly our immigrant population, there's a great deal of it that is just driven. I was watching, the person who started OnlyFans, and excuse me for going there again. I'm going there on note on the podcast, not on the iPad, so bear with me. But I don't know the ethnicity of the person that built OnlyFans. It's a name that's not like a John Smith type name or something like that. But somebody there had tremendous drive, and that's a company that's now building $500 million a year, making $500 million a year, something crazy like that. So this concept of work-life balance, is it still a thing? Is it only for the affluent? How does it look? I don't know. But I think at the end of the day, every generation says the generation after them is not as driven, and every next generation seems to have some of those driven people. So I don't know what to make of all the discussion on work-life balance. I know certainly as I've gotten older, life balances between business and investing and tennis, fitness, and golf and family and everything else in a way that it didn't when I was younger. I was obviously a hardworking young person, but there are a lot of hardworking young people still. I see a ton of people from our generation going to work at the investment banks. I see the people that work with me in this business, Becker Private Equity, Becker's Healthcare, McGuire Woods. Tremendous work ethic. So this work-life balance issue and all the discussion about work-life balance and everybody being spoiled, not work-life balance, try and tell that to our podcast producer, Chanel Bunger, our CEO at Becker's Healthcare, Jessica Cole, Holly Buckley, Amber Walsh, Bart Walker. These are all very motivated, very focused people. Emma Bowa, the same, and so many others. So I don't know if I quite buy the discussion on work-life balance having taken over the world. There seems to be a lot of people that are still working extremely hard. And I'll give a shout out to people in my generation too. My goodness, my colleague John Savolas at Skybridge, I haven't seen him work harder in his whole life, and he's after it and doing fantastic. And there just seems to a lot of it. The same with Rob Bennon, who started his own law firm at 55 or so and is just knocking out of the park, as well as Howard Sutker at Sutker Moran, started his own consulting firm in his 50s, and it just has built an incredibly successful firm. So this work-life balance thing, I don't buy all the stuff from the older generation, and the younger generation doesn't work anymore. We see people with tremendous work ethic, and we love it, including my two children. God bless them. The second subject is ESG. ESG was all the rage a few years ago. It seems like it's died down some. Even Larry Fink, the leader of the $10 trillion BlackRock, who all he did, it seemed like for 30 years, was make and print money. Then for 5 years, all he did was speak ESG, has stopped speaking ESG. And that's not here nor there, but it does seem like the ESG thing became one of these things that became, everybody talks about a different way. Nobody knew what it really meant. Things that were pegged ESG felt almost like a communist regime saying, that's ESG, that's not ESG. How do you say that Elon Musk, who was the preeminent developer of the electric car, doesn't win on the environmental side when you say, Exxon does? I mean, that just seemed crazy to me. The ESG thing just became polluted as a movement. Larry Fink, who became a convert, to ESG, ultimately stepped away from ESG because it became intolerable and incredible to try and reason what it really meant. And I think just a fascinating topic, a fascinating subject. Oh my goodness. The third subject that we'll touch on for a moment is diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is a really complicated subject because at the end of the day, equity and health equity is so important. Diversity in what we do is so important. And trying to constantly get that right balance between having the right person in the job and having the right amount of diversity and the right amount of health equity is a constant ongoing challenge. You see the pendulum in this swing back and forth to where essentially there is so much DEI movement and embracing of it to try and correct what have been long-term society. We applaud a lot of that, and then you see the flip side of that is things going in the other direction where it almost takes a swing back because people feel like it's been overdone. I mean, the reality of it is that DEI in some way, shape, or form is a very important movement, and hitting it down the middle in the right way is so important. When it gets sort of like all these things absconded by the far left or destroyed by the far right, it hits it wrong. But there's some spot for DEI that's right in the middle of our country, that's right on. We got to figure out the right way to embrace it without punishing those people that aren't part of the categories that we're trying to help. So just a debacle that it becomes at times, but at the end of the day, a very important movement. That's what we've got on DEI. So we've really talked about three things: work-life balance. This whole discussion of work-life balance is I think, obviously, like all things, the truth is somewhere in between. ESG, if I hear any more about ESG, I might have to shoot myself. And I say there's a joke, and I won't really shoot myself. And I know some people might get to shoot myself. And then finally, this concept DEI, somehow or another, we got to get back to hitting this just right down the middle, taking care of everybody in our country in the right way, but not taking away opportunities from people that are part of DEI communities or others that are not part of them either. It's not a zero-sum game. It's trying to create a bigger pool for all of us to make DEI work and make it work with everybody and not be penalizing one group to help another group and vice versa. In any event, as we said yesterday on our podcast, this art of compromise, hitting things down the middle. We, unlike some of these media companies, we're not paid by the Russians. In fact, we're not paid by nearly anybody enough. It is what it is. You can always sponsor a podcast, 773-766-5322. Thank you for listening. Today's discussion, work-life balance, ESG, DEI, and a lot more. Thank you for listening to the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast.